They say there are two things for certain in life, death and taxes. And there are certain things that you can do to shelter your assets from taxes and also from other people having control over it when you die, and that is creating a trust. Now, I work a ton in foreclosures, and one of the most honestly devastating and saddest things that I see is when people don't have their properties and don't have their assets and don't set up a family trust for their family. A lot of times we'll see people have wills, but a lot of times that's not even good enough. That still has to go through a probate process, which is then at the mercy of what the government decides ultimately, even if you have a will. We have seen some really tragic things where people can't sell property because of the way that the will is set up. And if you have a bad attorney, then it could really mess you up. So I'm going to show you guys how my family trust is set up, how it's structured, and when it comes to trust, living wills, LLCs, and then how we have all of this stuff, because these are all the LLCs and things that I own. All right. So really important. You guys want to have a trust. The biggest thing this does is this takes the control out of the government's hand and puts it into whoever you establish to be the trustee and the beneficiaries of your trust. If you have a trust, then you control everything that goes on in here rather than the government having to figure out how to divvy up all your assets if you pass away. And then you've got marital interest, you've got familial interest, you've got all these things that could really affect all of your assets in your LLCs. Now, there's a couple things that you really want to be mindful of before you even dive into a trust. And one, it's if you really even need a trust. If you don't have any assets, focus on getting assets first. Focus on building wealth first before you try to structure your family to your family trust. Now, I've got assets because I've got companies. Companies are assets. We've got cars. We've got insurance policies. We've got houses. These things are assets that should be protected by our trust. So we've got a family trust and we have a certain name for that family trust. And that in that trust, the main things you want to put in there are things like cars, insurance policies, houses. Now, this is really, really important because you can actually structure very similar to how the Vanderbilts did, or sorry, very similar how the Rockefellers did, where they have a universal life policy or kind of an infinite. So you hear this idea of an infinite life policy. And what happens is the trust has this life policy that they've been building in and contributing to. So then what happens is because they contribute to it, you can actually draw against this infinite life policy and use it as a loan to the members of your trust. So then what happens is later on down the road, family members, so like my son or his kids, so like a grandchild or something like that can actually pull money out of the life insurance policy on the trust and draw almost a loan from it and pay it back. So then we create our own bank here. So then we now have a life insurance policy that is a family bank, which is really cool. So as I contribute to that, that builds up what my family bank can do. And you can even pull that out to buy cars and do certain things. So then now instead of paying a loan to a bank, you're paying the loan to your family trust, which is really awesome. So you're building that wealth back into your family trust. So you also you want to open up the policy. A lot of times you can put it in the trust name rather than putting it in your own personal name. And then you would just have, hey, if Devin dies, the beneficiaries of that insurance policy are these people. And then a lot of times you'll have whoever the trustee. So you'll have trustees set up and then beneficiaries set up. And then a lot of times you actually have an attorney that like reads out what's going on and make sure things get distributed accordingly. But also that's also the trustee's job is to make sure that whatever happens in that policy gets distributed accordingly. From there, we have a holding company. Now, this holding company right here is actually the name on all of my LLCs. And this is really easy to do. If like, so like some of these I've owned before I started the holding company, you literally would just assign ownership. So you would have like a one page, and just depending on what your attorney says, a document that says, I assign my ownership to this holding company of this company. And so then like you can see, I've got a couple things. I've got a company that I have minority ownership. So an installment method, I'm a minority owner in that. The holding company is on that. I have sold a couple of, I've sold a business and then I have like a dormant LLC. That's all in the holding company. And one of the main reasons why you do this is because you want to shelter each of your companies from each other. So for instance, if we have rental properties over here and in these rental properties, somebody gets hurt, then they can't access what's in my trust. They can't access what's in my other companies because they're all in a holding company in different companies and sections. So then I have my virtual assistant staffing company, my education company for real estate wholesaling, and then my education company for launching and managing funds, raising capital. And so my holding company is the owner of these companies. And then now when it comes to the real estate company, this is a little bit different. And so when it comes to protecting yourself, protecting your assets, there's a couple things you want to do. So I've got a fund right here, and then a fund management company that I'm owner in. And then we have an asset level LLC. So we have what's called a fund of funds. So this fund actually funds this asset level LLC that then purchases these properties. And depending on, some people will say, hey, how many um, properties should I put into an LLC, or should each property have their own LLC? I'm going to fall into the camp of it depends on how many you plan on having. I do think that you should shelter your properties from the other properties and the liability in those other properties. But if you're going to hold anywhere between like more than 50, more than 100 properties, you can get away with having about 15 to 20 in each LLC, just like this. But if you're only going to hold maybe 5 in your life, then sure, give each of them their own LLC. The only bad thing about that is they're going to have their own bookkeeping, they're going to have their own accounting, they're going to have their own tax filings. And so we just like to make sure all of that is consolidated into a couple of LLCs that are just those holding companies for, 15 to 20 properties that we hold. And then we have our wholesale companies right here, fix and flip companies. So you want to make sure that they're all separated just for liability purposes. But ultimately, my holding company is what owned those companies. So they're not in my name. They're not even in my trust's name, but they're in the holding company that's owned by the trust. And so a lot of people ask me the questions of like, okay, what's a revocable trust? What's an irrevocable trust? The biggest differences between a revocable and irrevocable is that the trustee in a revocable has a lot more control. The different main difference is it's like I have a lot less control over the properties that are in an irrevocable trust. In a revocable trust, I have control over everything that's in there. The grantor, so like I am, there's a lot less tax advantages of having a revocable trust because I do control more of that. In an irrevocable trust, it's almost like a lot of times they'll say unless you have over like 50 to 100 million in assets, you shouldn't do an irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust is something that you like, this property is here to stay forever and we have this many assets, and honestly we're just building wealth and preserving our assets more than we're building our assets. So an irrevocable trust is something that's a little bit more set in stone. Those are going to be like family offices, things like that are going to be you're going to find to be a lot more on the irrevocable trust side. They're going to be far better tax advantages with them. The trust is the one that pays the taxes on that. It's not the grantor. In a revocable trust, the grantor pays the taxes on those. You're going to have less tax advantages, but you're going to have a lot more control of the assets inside of it. The one thing that I will always say is if you want to, one of the biggest reasons that you want to have a trust is because you want to have anonymity and you want to have kind of that shelter from creditors. You want to have that shelter from and that protection, that asset protection. So you want to open in one of 3 states. You want to either open in Wyoming, Delaware, or Nevada. Really, Nevada, I think Nevada is going to be a little bit on more on the expensive side. And I think Nevada only allows irrevocable trusts. But Wyoming is where we opened ours. And that's where I highly suggest you do a revocable trust in Wyoming. Unless you have a crazy amount of wealth, you really don't need to do any irrevocable trust. Those are going to be more expensive. They're going to have a much higher annual cost and annual fee to them. Whereas a revocable trust, it's going to be simple and it's going to be easier. So you're going to get a trust, you're going to have a living will within there, and then you want to structure a holding company that then owns your LLCs that you have. So this is my corporate structure. This is how our family is set up. We are protected in these areas. And you could do things like you could go to trustandwills.com and you could set this up for like $600, or you could go to a attorney. We paid our attorney around $2,500, sets this up, make sure everything is set in stone. And then now I know we're protected. My family is protected, our assets are protected. And I don't really have to worry at the end of the day that the government's going to have to come. And if I die, like they're going to have to figure out where do all the stuff that we have go? Where does the ownership in these companies go? How does this happen? Like, how does this distributed with our family, with the kids, because we've got 4 kids. That all is established within the trust, within the living will. So death and taxes are certain. And so you can do as much as humanly possible to make sure you have as much control in that. And so I would highly suggest setting up your family structure with just starting a trust, like start a trust, because I've seen so many families get ripped apart by the probate and estate process that the county and the government controls, and they just feel helpless. So at least, like, even a will is not enough. Make sure that you guys are setting up a trust. So this is how we have our setup. If you have any questions, make sure you comment down below. I would love to be able to answer any of the questions that you have for that. But make sure you guys set it up. Make sure you guys protect your family, and make sure that you guys continue to build generational wealth and build assets and protect those assets. So, as I always like to say, to great success and greater impact. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.